I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's time to get complicated once again with my friend Gevian Dargan from Animated Concepts, where we talk about serious stuff, maybe some not serious stuff. We're going to a serious topic today, Gevian. Going to talk about, I don't know, it feels like it's pervasive and kind of accepted, kind of to blame white people for everything. White guilt is in fashion these days. Thought we'd have a discussion. How you doing, Gevian?
I'm doing okay, Wes. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. We'll see how I'm doing at the end of this damn thing.
Yeah, right. I'll tell you that much. Well, we're catching up on the Hunger Games with the girls, so we got through the first two movies, and now we're going to be watching, I guess, Mockingjay parts 1 and 2. So we'll see how that goes. So far,
at least you haven't had to watch Twilight yet.
Yeah, that's next on the list.
I got a story for you. We can't tell it now, but man, I got a bad story with my nieces. But we see all these clickbait articles. I'm sure you see it. It's like, what is it, like leisurely strolls is white supremacy. You're like, what is this? Obviously, that's clickbait. It's meant to make you roll your eyes, actually click the article and mock the author. But it kind of comes from somewhere, and it feels like it's in vogue to blame white folks, at least in Western cultures, almost for everything nowadays. I'm sitting here, I'm going, what the hell did I do, Gervais?
When you were born, that's what.
Apparently, I was.
And you were born white, so it's like it's the sins of the father being passed down to the sons, and the mothers passed down to the daughters. Yeah, it's something where, I ain't gonna lie. It's like, I would say particularly in my community, and I'm gonna say my community at large. So for those of you who don't consider yourselves part of the Black, African American community, or you apparently didn't have these discussions growing up, or you did have these discussions growing up and you just thought it was dead wrong. Yeah, it's pretty much, y'all pretty much hold the gold medal for pretty much mucking everything up. So I ain't gonna deny that part. So, and the reason why I'm on camera today, as opposed to promoting the Animated Concepts bullet, because I anticipate for this discussion I'll have to be doing a lot of air quotes. So
you're doing bunny fingers.
Yeah, right. But yeah, it's something where I think basically it's too big of a subject because you do have to at some point get into how does this dynamic play out globally as well. But basically in terms of talking about America, there's no doubt, white people to blame for everything, but that's what happens when you've been in charge for the majority of the history of the country. You got to take the good, take the good with the bad. So it's still, a lot of people still felt like we haven't dealt with what's considered America's original sin, which is racism or race in general. So and there's a lot of
the world's original sin, Gervais? I've lived in Asia.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. At some point, the conversation gets complicated because you have to go globally, and then the minute you go globally, you know what's going to happen, right? You're going to realize is that by and large, white people weren't the only ones responsible for slavery. Other people were engaged in slavery. Some people will make the distinction in America that it was chattel slavery, like it wasn't like indentured slavery, like it actually was. There's some research that has been done that shown that when people came over initially, particularly, white European, if you want to call that, African or whatever, where it was more indentured slavery, and then it eventually evolved to the chattel slavery. I'm not an expert on that, so I don't want to get too much into which came first and this and that. But it's like slavery is not it's not unique to white people, but in terms of the discussion that we have in America, it is. And they're not the first ones to do it. They just exported it here over to the North Americans when they came.
Charles Soule said slavery is the history of the world. It's literally every corner of the world there's been slavery throughout times, and obviously slavery is awful. I'm not sitting here like, hey, slavery was of the time, so at the time it should have been supported. No, that's a gross idea, and I'm glad that it's been wiped out of American. As part of American politics or American culture and everything. Slavery, it's terrible that it was ever a part of American culture, a part of American everyday society. But it was recognized, and the founding fathers, when they were writing up the founding documents, said, all men are created equal. There was a reason that it was put in there, because that was the
okay. So then, Yeah, so now when you get into that, so that's where you're going to lose, I think, a significant amount of black people. like it's a compromise, but they do what they were doing. So if you say that on one hand, they said all men are created equal, which means you recognize all men are created equal. Then at the same time, you say, well, but for these guys over there, they're 3/5, and you're doing that for basically the grossest of reasons, because you just want to continue to make money and not recognize their rights. And there is evidence to suggest that, like you said, they knew exactly what they were doing. It's like, okay, then yeah, why should you not feel guilty about that? Is you knew what you were doing.
I didn't write the damn thing.
I'm talking about them, because they put into place a system that, whether white people like it or not, or whoever, some people benefit as a result of the system, and some people are at a great detriment because of that system. So at a certain point,
does show
it's not like,
even at that point in America, where slavery was a part of the commerce and everything in there were people that identified that it was wrong. They wanted to abolish it. They couldn't at that point, so they put in, the little, they planted a seed within the original context, which eventually resulted in the abolition of slavery. I wish it happened earlier. It should have. Yeah,
well, it should have happened earlier, but you realize that's weak sauce for the people who get the bottom end of the stick on that one. It's just weak sauce.
Well, no, I'm not saying it makes it better.
Hey guys, we do us, we're doing wrong, so we planted the seed here, but it's like, yeah, that'll make up for all the many years and centuries of what came to follow. And some people even extrapolate into what happens today. And it's like, now it's getting to the point where it's getting beyond quote unquote race, where now you're seeing people affected by the same system on a class basis. And a lot of people say the reason why slavery was left in the first place was because of a class basis. It was an economic issue. But there's a moral component. There's a moral component that basically, unfortunately, the founding fathers and those who came after them are never going to get out from under that until you basically take care of it on a real material and, or I would say, political basis. So I think at this point, given the amount of time that's gone by, just an apology is saying it's not my fault is not enough. At some point, the generations that come after that have to, on some level, make restitution with it. I mean, I
don't have to make restitution. I've never had a
slave. No, I'm saying
I've never
you don't have. You don't have to make restitution. You don't have to make restitution
I've never
for it.
Benefited from it in my life.
No, but if you're gonna track back, so I would put it this way then. So I never participated in what happened to the Jews in Nazi Germany. Never participated in that. But apparently a black man by the name of Ralph Bunche, who was part of the United Nations, set up and came up with a plan with reparations that now, as a taxpayer for the United States, basically helps to fund whatever it was that was done back to the Jews back in Nazi Germany. So why do I have a responsibility to take care of that when I didn't have anything to do with it?
That's the U.S. government. The Germans have a responsibility for that.
Let them take care of that. But I know that we as taxpayers here in America,
that's like part of the treaty.
We as taxpayers in America pay for it. No,
taxpayers
you want to call it a treaty? They lost.
Bullshit, Gervain.
and part of it's based on something happened to somebody over here, and we take care of that. So there's a lot of things like that. We all
for gender studies in Afghanistan, Gervain. Explain
that.
I'm
also paying for wars in Afghanistan that we shouldn't be fighting. So I explain that the same way that's explained, which means that a lot of times things happen that got nothing to do with me, but I end up paying for it. So that's not a new dynamic in terms of if we as a culture or we as a country or we as a community recognize that a great wrong has been done, whether we're directly responsible for it or not, we still feel a need to basically address that issue. And to make restitution.
It was addressed and there was a price paid. I mean, there was a lot of, it's the deadliest war in American history, right? A lot of people died for slavery to go away. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and a tremendous amount of capital that was all down the drains as we all murdered each other to get rid of that sin.
Yeah, well, because like you said, they knew at the time what they knew at the time what they doing was wrong.
Pay than blood?
Well, it was called it was called Reconstruction. Did we all know how that turned out? If you want to talk about backsies written large, that's what Reconstruction was.
There was nothing left. We burned everything to the ground.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. Is your 40 acres of the mule? Oh wait a minute, we sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, it's a touchy and it's a difficult subject because what it comes down to is there a legitimate claim to be made that, hey, I didn't do that. That wasn't something that I personally benefited from. So therefore, why should I have to be responsible for that? So then this is when we get into all the nice and deep weeds, and I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a deep historian, I'm not a political scientist. I'm sure there are examples that people who have pushed for instance, for reparations, for reparations in terms of what was done in slavery, but that there were certain things, there were certain systems that kept Black Americans, for lack of a better term, Black Americans, out of being able to build the kind of wealth over generations because of systems that were put in place because of slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and so on and so forth. If we're saying that those kind of historical policies don't have a real impact, that it all comes down to, well, lack of another better phrase, personal responsibility, then that opens up the door for me to question why we do a whole bunch of other things.
Listen, you're not going to get an objection from me to questioning why the government does a lot of things. But I'm not denying that there haven't been, even after the abolition of slavery, that there weren't mechanisms in place through law that weren't holding parts of American society back. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people fought against these things. They've been wiped out for the most part to this point. And there have been other things put in place to try and give people from traditionally disadvantaged communities a leg up or an opportunity to get in there and get a fighting chance and build up their own wealth. And I think just looking at the way people flock to America for opportunity, that there's no better place in the world for opportunity, regardless of where you've come from, the class that you came from, who your parents were, whether you have money or you don't have money. I truly believe everybody might not have an equal opportunity because we all have a very unique set of circumstances. The moment we are born, we are in you have a circumstance that is different than every other person in this entire world. But you have an opportunity here, and there are so many places in this world, and I've traveled a lot, that you don't have an opportunity based on the moment you were born.
Oh no, well that's the whole thing that Gandhi struggled with when you talk about the caste system in India. And so here's a guy talking about, having freedom from the Brits, the Indian people having freedom from the Brits, but at the same time, you're dealing with a culture, a society that has a caste called the Untouchables, where because of the moment you're born, you have almost no rights or just like a pathetic existence. And that's something that if the Indians ever want to wrestle with, they'll have to wrestle with that too. The thing is, these are all these systems, whether they're caste systems, political systems, economic systems, they all have victims. And the thing is that, and the fact that they all have victims, and they can all be from different ethnicities, if you will, or from different cultures, not only to the point where it's one culture or ethnicity oppressing another, sometimes it's the same ethnicity, the same people oppressing other people in their group. So that's why it gets complicated. It gets complicated. Absolutely. Because when you want to take something that is like you said earlier, something that is a human dynamic, like slavery has always been there. If we say, well, the original black man, and in the Bible, Moses, he was, let's just say he was Ethiopian. I know he wasn't.
Hey, I've read a lot of the Old Testament. There's a lot of slaves in the Old Testament.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of slaves. Who do you think was enslaving who? And it comes down to it. That was a lesson my father had to slap me upside the head with when I was coming into my teenage years, and when I had basically said, you know what, all white people just evil. Just evil. He's like, don't say something stupid like that. And then that's when we sat down with the globe and we went through the Bible and he pointed certain things out. He was like, and I was like, okay,
who built the pyramids?
I take your point. I take it exactly. I know. I take your point. No, that's what it is. So the thing is like now we have to be. I think a lot of times we have to be is very specific about what the grievance is, who's responsible for it, and if it wasn't addressed at some point in the past, are we going to be specific enough to address the problem that's before us so that we can move forward in a way that basically the issue gets addressed and I think, for the lack of a better phrase, everybody feels relatively good about it. But if we go back a little bit,
there's never going to be equity on feelings, Gervais.
Well, like I said, if best we can, that everybody feels good about it. I'm not going to say you're going to feel the same good about it as I would, but at least I don't feel good about that part. I feel good about this part over here.
In the Civil War, do you think people really felt good about it at the end? But there was a just victory in the end, and the right thing happened at a very dear and large cost. I don't think anybody was probably happy at the end of it.
So now when you talk about people walking around talking about the lost cause, but the thing is that, hey, all I say is I'm gonna be nice on this one. I was about to say something real mean spirited, but
I can handle it. I'm a big boy.
All right. What I say is that for a bunch of people, a bunch of traders, they sure got nicely reintegrated back into the system.
Okay, that's fine.
It just that seems kind of funny. It's like, yeah, you guys basically all but declared war. You actually did declare war, succeeded on other nonsense, and they got integrated real nice back in the system to the point they still talk about the lost cause, whatever it is. You lost. You just lost. You lost fighting for something that basically, as you just stated, for the most part, everybody knew was wrong in the first place. And you lost, but it seems like they enjoy a nice amount of power and equity, if you will, after the fact.
Well, look what.
So it can be done. Does everybody feel good about that? No, but equity was still managed to be achieved. Go ahead.
Let's go something a little more modern. We go to like Rwanda, where you have atrocities happening on both sides, just disgusting things. What are we going to do? Are we just going to take the one side and banish them out and murder them all? Or are we going to try some type of reconciliation? Of course, to do that, you have to have people that did things that you can even imagine, that can literally walk down the street next to a woman. They may have beheaded their son or something. And she's supposed to not do anything about it.
Yeah, what? I'm not denying that. We all saw how that played out with Nelson Mandela once he got into power and he realized what I tell people all the time: you have to realize what you're fighting for. If it's about selling scores, this joint will never end. It'll never end if it's all about selling scores. The real goal is, how do we move forward in a way that everybody, and I'll qualify it, they can relatively feel good about basically the jacked up stuff that just happened. So using that example, I got no problem with that. Then they should be able to pass this reparations bill tomorrow. It's like if the cost of reconciliation is that, yeah, we're all gonna have to do things we don't like, but in order to make at least on some level everybody feel good, then that HR, whatever it is that's been sitting there since Kanye's put in there, just pass it tomorrow.
Well, how about we just go back and do some research and see who actually benefited from slavery?
Well, why do I have to do that? Because if I have to go back, if I could go back and say who benefited from slavery, then why can't I go back and say who's responsible and guilty for it? So that's what I'm saying. So at a certain point, you got to say, here we are. And from this point forward, we're going to give you guys reparations because we understand something happened. Maybe everybody wasn't affected by it, but something happened. So we can move on and talk about something else. What percentage of the U.S.
population even benefit from it? That's actually here today.
Well, I can't answer that question because I said I'm not an expert in terms of.
You're going to make 95% of people whose families might not even have been here already pay for something they took no part in?
Yes. We do that all the time, as we established early. Did I want to declare war against Afghanistan? Keep in mind, no. But did I pay for it? You're damn straight I did. People are always paying for something that they don't agree with all the time. So I don't understand why all of a sudden that dynamic. Well, it doesn't make it right, but it's what happens. So again, this goes back to the conversation we had 2 weeks ago. Any kind of reconciliation, any kind of moving forward in a positive way is always going to require, on some level, some level of unilateral disarming. That's what it's going to require. Somebody's got to take one in the teeth and spit the teeth out and not like it and walk around with a gap, to make things quote unquote right. And if that's not the case, and that's what it is. Someone's got to take the hit. So sometimes the 95% got to pay for the 5% because the 95% who were responsible beforehand got away with it.
I'm not. I don't care. It's none of my fault. I never had nothing to do with it. Hey, Gervais, I don't feel bad about the Crusades. I know it was done in the name of Christianity. I'm a Christian. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't a part of the church that time. It's none of my concern. Do I think it's wrong? There are parts of it that I certainly don't agree with. There have been things done in the name of Christianity that I think are awful. I do not take credit, or I do not feel 1 ounce of guilt over it, and I'm not responsible for any of it. So no, you don't get any of the things that I work for things that I haven't done.
Well, I'm of a different mind of that because as a Christian, I do feel guilt for that. I feel guilt for that for another reason. That if there's any way that I can affect what's going on, so we want to take something modern. It's like I'm not a Catholic, but there's been apparently a lot of harm done to people in terms of child abuse, in terms of the Catholic faith. And while I'm not a Catholic, I am a Christian, and Catholic and Catholicism is part of Christianity. And I do feel bad about the fact that my faith is being wielded in any way by anybody to basically destroy people's lives like that. In some cases, even when we talk about sexuality, where people end up committing suicide because of the struggle of what the faith puts on them in terms of what they feel is their identity. So I definitely feel guilt about that. Now, do I feel like, so I mean, which is raising this issue, is like, do I feel like this deep personal guilt? Like, I was the one who did that to that person.
Well,
no,
you're Christian as well, even though you weren't part of the Catholic faith and you didn't take part in it.
That's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. But for me to say that I don't feel some sort of guilt or some sort of responsibility for that, then that's where we have to disagree. And it's like I have to be able to do in my corner, my way, whether if it's even simply advocating against it, even there's nothing I can directly do about it. It'd be like, this is wrong. So I mean, and
I'm not saying I support it.
Oh no, I'm
saying if you're a Catholic, my wife's Catholic. Mm-hmm. She's a member of the church. Her father's Catholic. If they were aware of what was happening in there, then they should feel guilty for it. But if they were an upstanding member of the church, they were unaware of what was happening within the Catholic Church that was going on at like at an administrative level where you have this massive cover up. That's not their fault. You should feel
okay, but now that you know
sympathy or empathy for the victims, and you should understand that it's wrong. But because you're Catholic does not put any sort of guilt on you. My wife didn't do anything.
So let's say they shouldn't feel a guilt. Should they feel a responsibility for it then? Once you're aware of this problematic outcome or this problematic situation, do they have a responsibility as Catholics, or do we have a responsibility as Christians to do something about it, to correct it?
Oh, I think the Catholic Church absolutely does. There needs to be some oversight.
Yeah, but aren't you the Catholic? But aren't those who are part of the Catholic Church responsible?
Yeah, that's one of the richest organizations in the entire world. And they
but now, when you're saying Catholic Church, are you just talking about the leadership being responsible, or are you talking about the body of the Catholic Church being responsible?
I'm talking about the people that were playing the shell game, that were moving around sexual predators within communities and not telling the parishioners. They were responsible. So we know for a fact that those guys are responsible. They necessarily haven't changed his ways. At what point do those people who are part of the larger body of the Catholic Church responsible for holding them accountable? Or for the very least, withdrawing their support by saying, I'm no longer a Catholic then, if that's the case. If this is what the leadership wants to push and promote, I don't think that's how Catholicism works. I don't think you just give up the faith because you found out that a human being might have had a little evil streak in him. It's in the Bible.
So at what point does
pure faith in people?
At what point do Catholics, not about leadership now, Catholics are responsible for saying or doing something about, hey, this ain't right? Because other than that, then you always have a small group who is basically doing something in your name, or at least associated with a group, doing horrendous things, and nothing is changing. So only those people are responsible for it, and everything goes on, and the larger group is not responsible for it, even though they're not directly responsible for doing the shell game.
They should demand oversight. Yes, they should demand some transparency. They should demand some type of investigation with real results that says this is exactly an accounting of what we know happens. These are the accountings of what we did in response. these are the pitfalls that we found, and this is what we're going to do moving forward, and we're going to be open and honest about it. Now, I don't know that the Catholic Church is always like that. I'm not Catholic.
I'm not Catholic either. I just know about Catholic what I read in the news.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but I just know about reading the news.
Demand that from your leadership.
Well, I mean, look, I'm not gonna. I'll give you this much. It's like when I'm talking about like social justice and somebody throws black on black crime in my face. It's like, okay, I'm not responsible for that. It's like I don't go around committing crimes against black people, but people feel perfectly free to start talking about black on black crime when I'm talking about something else over here. When I'm talking about police reform, black on black crime has got nothing to do with that. Well, why don't you say something about black on black crime? Because one, I don't participate in it. Two, last time I checked, most people do commit black on black crime. 9 times out of 10, or I won't say 9 times because that's accurate stat, but it seems like on a fairly regular basis, they end up getting arrested and going to jail for it. So why do I have to speak about black crime? How about this with
Gervais? I know that you were supporting the Black Lives Matter protests, which were protests against police brutality. We know in certain parts, in certain cities, and in certain groups within there, they went too far. They were burning down buildings. We know there some people, lives were lost. Should you be accountable because those people that did things that you wouldn't have done, even though you were supporting the movement, should you be accountable for paying for all those buildings and things that were burnt down and something that you believed in, but you didn't believe in what the way we're actually doing?
Okay, yeah. Ideally, no, but realistically, yes. You are held accountable for that.
You should not. No, Gervais, you didn't do anything.
Dude, no, this is what I said. I said ideally, no. But realistically, yes, you are held accountable for it. Let's not act like we aren't. That's why there were many videos on Facebook where people marching along, and you're right. There was one video in particular where marching along, and 2 white people in ski masks were spray painting on the side of the Starbucks. And the black lady said, "You need to cut that crap out because we get blamed for that." That's just the reality of life. If you're associated with a group, you catch it whether it's right or not. And there's been plenty of people, and plenty of people who have no problem assigning blame to everybody who was down there when, even though 95% of the people were peaceful in terms of their protests, it's the 5% that get all of you 100% smeared. That's just the way it goes. Look, I feel for anybody
that I'm fully responsible for my views and my words. I don't think you're responsible for any of those buildings being burnt down, whether or not you were a member of those protests, because you did not partake in it.
Yeah, but I was at the protest, so I'm going to get smeared with that anyway. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm not actually. Yeah, Wes, I'm not disagreeing with your premise. You were absolutely right. I've gone to many a protest. There was one I was actually talking to someone the other day about this. It was about maybe 3 years ago, where they were protesting. I want to say it was the Laquan McDonald thing. Because we were protesting down at police headquarters. So we go out to the protests, and a bunch of people from a bunch of churches had organized it. We're all out there, and we're sitting there. They're making their speeches, and everybody's showing their moral support from getting some accountability and some transparency about what happened with that matter. And then 2 guys walk up with chains and then proceed to lock the front of the police headquarters. 2 guys out of probably about 600 people. Now, are we all personally responsible for that? Nope. But did we all get tagged with this agitation to take a direct action? You sure as hell we did. And that's the price you pay for being associated with a group.
And
it's wrong, but it's life. And so you have to deal with that. So at some point, if you're saying everybody is individually responsible for their actions, then we have to start talking about, okay, fine then. Everybody's just individually responsible for their actions. Then we have to start saying is then what are we commonly responsible for when it collectively we're responsible for? Because basically, if I'm always individually responsible for something, then I'm never collectively responsible for anything. And if I'm not collectively responsible for anything, then at no point and this is why I'm probably going to go libertarian now, then I'm with them. At no point should I be extracted any kind of a cost for what the collective does. Because that's not on me. If you decide to start a war in Afghanistan, not one dime of my tax money should go towards that because I personally don't agree. I didn't personally start that war. I told my senators at the time, don't do it. March down don't march down and a bunch of anti-war marches anyway. They went ahead and did it, and they sent me the bill for it. Sent brothers. My brother came back, and I'm grateful and glad for that. Well, my family sent a brother over in support of it, but it's like in support of it, even though none of us supported it. So it's like at some point, if you're going to collectively benefit from something, whatever it may be, you also have to take on the collective responsibility of it. Now, and then maybe the difference is we're not talking about guilt. We're talking about guilt versus responsibility. Now, I understand how the government works. The government collects taxes. We have a body of people who are supposed to pass laws and decide what they do with that money when it comes to all the different areas of life, where it comes to taking care of the commons and infrastructure, when it comes to executing quote-unquote foreign policy, when it comes to determining wars. I have no problem with that. But at a certain point, we as Americans, whether we feel we personally should be guilty for something or not, things are being done in our names. So now, to me, I can agree with you on this. I don't have to feel guilty about that, but you're damn sure responsible for it.
Hey, man, I was in Afghanistan. I knew after about very early on, I was like, there's no reason for me to be here. This is the biggest waste of time and money in my life. There was nothing that will ever be accomplished here. I did what I was told to do, and I don't feel guilty for one day that I was there. I did the best that I could to ensure that the rest of the guys in the unit, as many of them would come back with me as possible. And I did a damn good job of it.
No, but you don't feel responsible for whatever happened in Afghanistan as a result.
No, I didn't do any of that.
Okay.
They talked to me. That thing that just happened never would have happened. I could have told them, they're like, yeah, you can't do that. That's crazy. That was that was one of the biggest plots I've ever seen. I can concede this one. I can concede this one because it helps me out of a whole bunch of the stuff like that people try to tag me for. So I can concede I can concede not being held guilty on this one. I got no problem with that. What are people tagging you on? What are people trying to say you're guilty of? You didn't.
Oh, no, I already gave one example. If I say that I'm for Black Lives Matter, it's like, well, you're responsible. There's people like you responsible for burning my store down. Okay, I mean that's a thought. That's a thought. No. I said, what I'm not saying. Dude, I said it before, and I'll say it again. I said, ideally, no. Realistically, yes. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying, ideally, no.
How much should be understood to pay for all the buildings to be rebuilt?
Every time I pay taxes, I got to do that. It's like if they set up a fund, if the city of Chicago. If the city of Chicago sets up a tax that in any way reimburses a business owner for the damage done during those riots, they're not paying for it. I'm not saying they have. I'm just saying if they do it, then that's what it is. That is me paying for it. Now, do I personally have to cut a check? Do I personally have to cut a check out of my finances to do that? No, I don't. No, I don't. But the thing is that there is. Ignore the fact that this is idea. I don't think I should have to either, and I don't. No, I'm just throwing that out as a theoretical. I'm not throwing it out as a hypothetical. I'm throwing it as a hypothetical. I'm not saying this is what actually happens. Well, what we're talking about is that if we're going back to the question of should white people feel guilty, and I'll say this, you should feel guilty if you did something wrong. If you didn't do something wrong, then don't feel guilty. Now, if you want to say should you feel responsible for it, then I think that's where you and I disagree in terms of whether we feel responsible
for anything I haven't done.
Then I'll go back to the question. Everything comes down to individual.
I'm not responsible for Clinton. I'm not responsible for Obama. I didn't do any of that stuff. I'm disenfranchised voter. I don't support any of that crap. You know what I do support? Hey, how about this one? This will piss everybody off. You know what I support? I support old Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem. I went and did 20 damn years of my life so everybody could protest the way that they wanted to. That was nonviolent. If he decided to take a knee during the national anthem in the NFL, and if his team was willing to let him go out there and do it, then that's his fucking right to do it. Do I agree with taking a knee during the national anthem? Not particularly. I think the national anthem obviously represents something different than other people, and it certainly does represent something different to me. But if he wants to take a knee to protest or make a stance against police brutality, I say go do it. But I don't feel, I'm not into police brutality. I've never partaken in that. I don't feel bad about it, but I do support his right to go out there and take a knee and go and protest. There you go. Go do your thing.
Oh, well, I don't disagree with that for those reasons, especially since when initially he wasn't taking a knee. He was just sitting out the anthem to begin with. And as you and I both know, and I assume you know as well, why did he start taking a knee? He started taking a knee because a serviceman went, as a member of our armed forces, went to him explained to him and said and gave him an alternative to do it, and he gladly embraced the alternative. And even then, he was catching heat for it, just like a whole bunch of other people were catching heat for it. That's fine. If you individually decide to protest for something, you individually pay the cost for that, then that's fine. I can't argue against personal responsibility. I can't argue against personal responsibility, personal accountability, personal pay the cost. Maybe this is not as complicated as we started off with this.
I didn't do it, Jermaine. It wasn't me.
Oh no!
I sit here like I said, my family. That's the only thing I care about.
No. Then the only thing that's left to wrestle with is there such a thing as collective responsibility? And then maybe there isn't such a thing as collective responsibility. Maybe it's just people just extracting the cost from us, extracting the cost from those of us who are innocent of those decisions on behalf of their bad behavior. I got no problem with that.
I don't feel guilty for being white. It's like I don't feel guilty for being Christian. I think the weirdest thing, you know, wants me to feel the guilt. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
You wants me to feel the guiltiest about being white.
Go ahead.
Other white people. Get out of here, man! Just because I don't feel guilty like you, I don't have to feel responsible for every bad thing that's been done because of my skin color.
I do. Okay, we in agreement. We in agreement with that one. Like I said, when I talk to people on social media, somebody goes Chicago, like that's supposed to be like an argument. I'm like, yeah, I live in Chicago.
Chicago's a shithole. Are you responsible for it because you live there?
Bad things happen. No, I'm not, dude. I'm not saying that I am. What I'm saying is,
voted for the mayor. It's
I didn't vote for that mayor. But anyway, so I didn't vote for that mayor, but I realized I have to work with that mayor because she is the mayor. Just like with Rahm Emanuel, I didn't vote for Rahm Emanuel twice, and I said, but if he wins the third time, especially if every black ward here in Chicago votes for him the third time, I don't ice skate uphill. I'll do what I need to, because apparently most of the people, or a majority of the people, basically we're talking about 25% people voting, and the majority of that 25% says they want Rahm Emanuel, then I got to do what I got to do. But, and I don't want to get too far off for a point here. It's like, yeah, I don't disagree with the ideal that basically I alone, you alone, are responsible for our actions. If other white people feel the need to make other whites guilty for the things that they've done, only thing I would put up in, I'm not going to say in the defense, but as explanation, is that there are systems that have been in place that basically disproportionately negatively affect certain groups of people, regardless of what your individual decisions and or circumstances are. And at the same time, as I think we'll all find it out, is that those systems are rapidly catching up now, that everybody's catching it, and everybody's catching it, regardless of your quote unquote race, but definitely in terms of your class. Because if you're poor in this country, whether you're from the South Bronx or the Appalachian Mountains, you're going to get dealt a certain way because of the way the system is, regardless of what your level of personal responsibility is.
I think if you're poor, you have more opportunity in America than any place else in the world to get yourself out.
I'm not going to argue with that. So I've got no problem. I've got no problem with the personal responsibility ethos, as long as when people screw up, then they all get the same personal consequences. And then if I had to say there's anything that I object to, is that when a precedent is set, the precedent follows all the way through until people decide the precedent is otherwise. But it's like I've lived in a system where I've seen a precedent has been set, and because of quote unquote race, sometimes, not every time, but sometimes there's a different precedent. Sometimes it's simply because someone has more money than someone else, and that can also apply that despite someone's race. That's why everybody was up in arms about OJ, or at least some people were up in arms about OJ, because it was like he beat the system doing exactly the same thing that his white counterparts from that same class had done for decades and centuries before that.
They literally had a blood trail from this crime scene all the way onto a plane that he was
on.
Absolutely.
Dude, don't. But if people think that people think OJ wasn't guilty, you're kidding yourself. Everybody knew he was guilty as sin. It was the fact that he used his money to get the result that he wanted. He used the legal system to get the result that he wanted. So why are we acting like? So at that time, I don't understand why people act like, oh, this is the worst thing that ever happened in the American justice system. I can't understand how this happened. It's like, dude, he had enough money. He just happened to be a black man that happened up with, and he was famous. He used his fame, his celebrity, his money to get the result that he wanted. It's like that's what happens when you can buy a high-powered defense. So I've got no problem. If we're moving into the age now that quote unquote race doesn't matter. Hey, great, but we all know that if that's actually the truth, okay, then that's all I'm saying is.
It still exists in this world. I'll give you a couple of examples, just the ones that I know. Mm-hmm. When my niece, she's half black, she's half white, she went into school, is in 3rd grade, so she would have been 8 years old, and there was something happening. There was some type of there was some strife based on race, like the black kids and white kids weren't getting along, and they go into the gymnasium, and the principal of the school said, "Black kids over here, white kids over here," and was separating them by their race. And my niece went up to the principal and she said, "My father's white, my mother's black." He goes, "You're colored."
Yep.
That is wrong. That was as an 8-year-old child. That is a true story. That story ain't that long, but that's within the last 15 years.
When did this happen? Okay, and that goes all the way back to if you had one drop of blood, black blood in your system, then you were considered black.
Well,
so
it was 1/8.
So now should that white whoever that person was, 'cause I want to assume they were white,
be fired.
Should that principal be individually feel guilty about what he did? Yeah, he should.
Absolutely.
Should white people in general feel guilty about it? I'm willing to concede y'all don't have to feel guilty about it, but I will concede that with the caveat, something got to be done about this crap. Something got to be done about
Another example, my
brother. Something got to be done.
Unfortunately, he got into a bad circumstance, and he decided that he was going to sell pharmaceuticals on his own, but they weren't pharmaceuticals; they were illegal. And he got caught, and he had what was he have? He had like a bale of marijuana. He had 1.5 ounces cocaine. He had some pills, and he had a substantial amount of money on it. Now, they didn't even charge him with the bale of marijuana. They're like, that's small potatoes. They just kind of got charged with the pills and the cocaine. And it goes up before the court. He makes a plea or whatever. And initially, the district or whoever was the prosecutor decided, and they recommended that he get probation. And the judge is like, "Are you fucking with me?" And like, no, and my brother's a good-looking guy like myself, pretty clean cut at the time. He would have been about 20 years old. Do I think a black person in that same exact circumstance as a black male would have got the same treatment? Absolutely not. And neither did the judge. Because the judge was like, "You are out of your absolute mind. He's getting 5 years minimum for what he's done." Now, clearly, there's a different result within the same system. So there are inequities, and I cannot deny that, Gervais. And I think that's wrong. And I will absolutely, anytime it is identified, I will point out that it's wrong, and I will say that needs to stop. Because that's on me. If I see something wrong and I don't say anything about it, then I'm wrong. Yeah.
No, and I'll give you this, Wes. I mean, I think there's a difference between talking about individual guilt and responsibility. And I think really, if I had to say what I'm getting at, is institutional and systematic guilt and responsibility. And I think a lot of times what it is that I've always liked the term institutional, quote unquote, institutional racism or institutional or systematic racism. Because what it is that it's at least acknowledging there are systems in place. There are institutions in place, like a Harvard University.
I think there's biases in place that are more within the individual where when you're given a certain amount of responsibility, you're allowed to legislate the rule and not put it down equally. You get to take into consideration the circumstances, and I do think the race or the circumstances where the person comes from does get taken into consideration, and certain people do get a law into the deal depending on where they are.
Yeah, and we're saying the same thing because I don't disagree with that because and that's why I say it's the system or the institution. So let's take the case of the and help me out with this, with the 3 Yale students that got accused of raping that black prostitute, I believe it was.
I thought it was Harvard, but it was the lacrosse.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, no, if it's the lacrosse team, if it's Harvard or Yale, Yale. So with that there, what happened in that situation? Now, if I recall correctly, you had a white DA who basically took them, I would say unfairly prosecuted them based on their race of being white. because of what they had allegedly done, have been accused of doing to the I believe she was a black prostitute. Because it wasn't just with salacious headlines, but if I understand, if my recall of it is correctly, he was up for a vote, and the reason why he took the tack that he did, he was up for re-election. The reason why he took the tack that he did was because the constituency that he had to get the vote from was predominantly black. So that means that's a system thing. So like you said, his biases, his circumstances, the situation, he ended up using a system in a way that it actually ended up being racist towards the three Yale students, where you would have gotten a terrible outcome based simply on the racial dynamics and the racial things at play, but it's a system that allowed that to happen. So these systems and institutions, they have to start being corrected. Oh yeah,
because she was famous. Anyone else that got convicted or made a plea deal with what she did, you got probation. You would have paid a fine. You just go on your merry way. She ended up doing prison time. That's crazy.
They're making an example out of her.
Yes,
it's like it's like, dude, it's like
you try to.
So I mean, so all I can say with this is like. No. I think you've moved. I think you've moved me on this, Wes. I think you've moved me on this. I'm gonna give you this one. You're gonna get this one. I think you'll get this one. So all I can say, I'll say this. It's like, if white people are trying to make the rest of y'all feel guilty, that's between y'all. Because I have no time for somebody trying to make me. Nobody trying to. I'm with you. It's like when I if I put hashtag Black Lives Matter on my thing, and somebody's coming to me with Chicago or black on black crime or black people hold black people back, and I have to almost either ignore that nonsense or keep it moving, because I think we're moving into an age now, an age of information, where basically nothing is cut and dried like that. That's how we got to this title of this show is complicated, because what we're starting to realize is that I think on an individual level, we all realize everybody is capable of doing the most benevolent and greatest things, and also capable of doing the dirtiest and the most obscene things that we can imagine. But there is something like, and I think you hit the nail on the head, there is a system that allows for, if someone gets into a position of leadership or power or authority in that system, and they have biases or prejudices or any kind of bigotry, and in some cases racism, it allows that to be personal gain. That's a good one. It allows that to be amplified and magnified to an effect that basically is not good for the group. And in some cases, some people think y'all should be held guilty for it. I didn't do it. I'm just raising my kids, man. I take your point. No, honestly, I take your point. I take your point. I think you make a very good point. Look, I fight and die hard for things where if I know I'm right on this one, I have to say it's a little too complicated to basically say, should white people feel guilty based on the way you're presenting it? White people should feel guilty if they did something wrong. And even I would say, when you say white people, what do you mean by white people? Are you talking about white Americans?
Mostly.
Are you talking about white? Okay, we're just talking about white Americans.
Europeans get it too, but they're less.
Yeah, but they get it for different.
I've been to Europe.
Yeah,
there's less. It's not as much of a melting pot as America. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, because they clearly know what country they belong to, and if Germans mad at the French, then we know we're mad at Frenchmen as opposed to, white Frenchmen or white. Yeah, America's a different bag, man. And I think the problem with America is there's just a lot of fallout from its history. There's a lot of fallout that's manifested itself in terms of particularly the legal system and particularly the economic system. And the thing is, honestly, it just took too long.
There are mechanisms, specifically in our schooling, where these like ideas like you can't make it because of this. You're just being held down between this, rather than, when I was a kid, it's like you can do anything, but you have to work really hard. That was what I was told my entire childhood. I don't know if you were, even though I was in a, broken home and stuff, everyone would always, you can do it, but you're going to have to work harder than everybody else.
Well, I'll say this. For me, when I was told growing up, and I think there's a fair amount of people who can attest to the same thing, is that you were told you have to overcome the system that's in front of you. It's like there is a system that's designed to keep you down and keep you in place, particularly based on your race. You were always made keenly aware of that. where you had to find a way to overcome that. So, and I'll use wrestling as an example, because I was listening to I apologies to those of the audience who are not as familiar with wrestling as Wes and I are, but maybe this could be put in the notes for the video. But basically, it was Mark Henry talking to Steve Austin about Ahmed Johnson, and he was like basically, and in the course of that conversation, Ernie Ladd, who for those you know was a veteran black wrestler who basically mentored a lot of wrestlers in general, but in this case, he was having a conversation with another wrestler, Mark Henry, where he says to him, when he came into WWE, don't mess this up for everybody who looks like you coming behind you. That's a common refrain. I mean, you're any kind, yeah. So should I feel guilty and responsible for that? Hell no. Ideally, no. I should not be told at any time of my life that everything that I do is some representation or reflection of this larger black community that I might neither have no direct connection to, no responsibility to, no idea of, or be responsible for their actions. But you're damn straight, I'm being told that I should be responsible for that everything I do basically is some kind of reflection or some kind of going to have some kind of impact on this larger group of people in this particular country that I will never meet or never have anything to do with.
Yeah,
so that may be where that's okay. It's okay, but that may be where my personal sense of collective responsibility comes from, because you were definitely told that. I was told that when I went away to private school. I was told that I got to make sure I don't mess things up for everybody that came before me and everybody that came after me. I went away to college. I heard the same thing. When you go into life, you hear the same thing. If you go into for some of us, there's some. We're not a monolith. So if this isn't your story, then fine. But for those of you who this is your story, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You are told whenever you go into a quote unquote non-black space that when you go in there, you're carrying the community, whether you like it or not, whether it makes sense or not, whether it does or not. So, like I said, ideally, I get exactly where you're coming from. In terms of life, realistically, you're always dealing with some collective responsibility, unless you're not. And if you don't, then you don't. So I got a problem. So people say black people are on the monolith because they don't want to be held either positively or negatively to one group. All right, fine. Then if you reject that responsibility, that's fine. Just don't come claiming it when, well, you know where I'm about to go, good old CT, Clarence Thomas, don't come claiming it when things go horribly wrong.
So I got a problem with that. Sir. I know a lot of black people. None of them have ever felt about things exactly like you do. You are unique.
Oh no!
And I no, that's
definitely when I'll say this, no, but I don't know. I'll push back on that a little bit. No, but for some black people to say they've never heard what I just described, or have never heard, have never had their lives framed in what I just said, that is not true. Now I'm not going to say every black person's heard that, but I'm saying there's enough of us that we can say, yeah, that's a common thread. That's a common thread.
I hope the younger generations don't have that kind of pressure put on them. Jackie Robinson obviously had to do that, but he's breaking ground there. He was a major change influencer as far as American culture. Me personally, I was always just told, don't make yourself look stupid, and don't embarrass the family.
No, and for some of us black people, because I got to qualify all this stuff. For some of us black people, we're told the same thing, but then the you're representing this larger community gets thrown on top of it. That was the same thing with Barack Obama. If you think Barack Obama didn't have a sense of, or wasn't told, or wasn't made clear that you're the first black president, as a matter of fact, that's why many in the black community were told not to criticize him whatsoever, because he's the first black president. If he doesn't do well, they'll never let another one in again. And anybody who says that wasn't out there, you're lying. You're lying, or you're totally naive. It still persists to this day. So I agree with you. Individually, should I have to do I tell my kids that? No, I stopped telling my kids that. I tell my kids, you're just like you said was told to you. Your job as a student is to go to school to learn, get good grades, and set yourself up so that you can basically be responsible for yourself. I have no interest in putting that community responsibility on my kids, for the simple reason is that the community will not protect my kids based on that so-called collective responsibility. They will not. Not this community, not the larger American community. Oh yeah, if it's every man for himself, I'm all with every man for himself. So that means when I go into a courtroom and you start dealing with me, you deal with me based on the facts and the circumstances at hand. But if I find that you're dealing with me based on some American communal or cultural bias or whatever it is, or whatever, the 5 black guys or whoever you think I look like or represent that came in before me, then I'm going to operate under that reality as well. And yeah, I'm going to hold some groups of people guilty.
It won't be me, because I wouldn't do that to you, Gervais. I see.
I know you would do that, but as you and me, Wes. Well, that's what. Okay, then. So that's what I'm saying. You have got me to the point of understanding, and what I mean by understanding is, it's like you have to acknowledge that, and that's why I say again. That's why when the phrases institutional, systematic, came along, I thought that was. It's not perfect, but it's a good starting point for explaining, at least, or trying to wrestle with, how is it you find that in a country like America, where I agree, there's opportunity. You can't deny there's opportunity. There's too many stories. There's a guy that is a local politician here, and in some cases national, you talk to, this guy, Willie Wilson. It's like black, conservative, but I'm a huge fan of his because as his story goes, he was given an opportunity by Ray Kroc to own a McDonald's franchise, and he ran with that joint. And what I like about Willie Wilson is that it's just my opinion. It's been in my experience. He does not tell his story in the way that some conservatives tell their story, where they built the log cabin that they were born in. He was like, I was given an opportunity by somebody, a white man, and he ran with it. He took that franchise, built a bunch of franchises, got himself a little medical supplies business, did his little gospel thing, and he's doing what he needs to do. And he looks back and takes care of his community by addressing some of the systematic problems, like the bail system, especially here in Chicago, where he bails people out because he realized it's not a fair system where you lock people up for days, weeks, and months on end and jam them up in all these other ways, simply because they're too poor to be able to afford some of these exorbitant bails that get charged. Bails get charged. It's like these things are becoming complicated because the thing is, and this is a good thing, because we have more information available to us. So now we're exposed to more experiences and perspectives than we were before. 30 years ago, if even that long, 20 years ago, you would almost have to put yourself in a certain lane. You have to, because that's the information that was presented to you. Those are options that are presented. But now we realize, you know what? I've got relatives who are white. They got black wives and mixed kids. I'm black, and I've got Filipino relatives. And this is that. It's like, dude, it's a whole new world now. And like I said, I'll take your point. You convinced me on this sense. Should white people, so white Americans, feel guilty for what other white Americans may do? I can't put that on somebody. But should we all feel guilty? Should we all feel guilty about these systems that we got? Hell yes, we should. They need to be changed. I feel
guilty, but I'll acknowledge that they need to get better. Unfortunately, it's right there. Everybody,
I got no problem with that.
That's what I'm saying. When you put something that complicated in the hands of a human being, unfortunately, it'll never be perfect. But it can always be better. I fully believe.
Yeah, I think probably the only difference between us at this point is a question of, I can go with you on the guilt thing. I can definitely. I'm not going to say someone has to be feel guilty for somebody else does, but I do think there's a responsibility, a collective responsibility to address it. I think we should all, at the very least, be responsible for correcting things, whether it be individually and collectively, to correct those things. And I think if that's how this idea that white people have to feel guilty about something. So I will give you this. I don't understand why there has to be necessarily that emotional convicting component to it to basically do the right thing. Maybe that's because it's some technique they feel, well, if somebody won't do it rationally, then you have to go after them emotionally for it. That's the only thing I can figure with that. And that's just a bad tactic and a bad approach to take. Sometimes you should be able to rationally, on some level, you should be able to empathize. And I think there's more of a thing of empathizing than saying, if it were you, would you be okay with this result, with this outcome? As opposed to saying, because you're white, you're automatically guilty for it. It's like, I don't want to, because this requires a certain amount of unilateral disarmament for me, because I paid attention to politics too long. And it's like, you can find yourself in a position where you take the high road on this, and man, you get kneecapped every time. Absolutely. Because everybody, yeah, and then the minute the opportunity comes for them to do the right thing,
not always work.
Okay, so for those of you who are going like, man, this was a tough one, Gevian. That's why it's tough because I get what you say. I say ideally, I get what you're saying, man. But I'm like, there's that part of me that's going like, nah, man. I say this ain't how this joint work.
I get it. Yeah, but I do want to say, when I was in high school, I wasn't told to go to school and do a good job. My mom actually was like, would be like, Wes, you're not going to school today. I need you to work at the restaurant. I'm going to pay you in smokes. We're like, what? My senior year, she's like, how the hell are you in the National Honor Society? I was like, I don't know. I just show up for the test now. I was like, otherwise,
but she didn't expect you to go out. She didn't expect you to go out and represent the white community, though. So that's the whole thing. That sounds like a great experience.
How are you getting these grades? Like, you've been working for smokes down at the restaurant. I was like, I don't know. It's easy.
Yeah, so I'll say this, Wes. I always, sometimes with some of these topics, I dread addressing them because they really are. They are sometimes simple, but they are very complicated. I think in terms of where they play out.
They're emotional.
Yeah, they're hot buttons for a reason. Yeah, exactly. But I hope that with this conversation, and I'm not going to say that I think everything I've said held up logically.
I know.
I will automatically concede that to those in the comment section that were going to come after me on this. But I think what I hope,
a couple times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I hope what this conversation does, it at least opens up to at least talking about this more and actually recognizing that. You know what? I think sometimes things are changing. And even though some things are still happening, there is something to be said that, you see it on memes and social media all the time. It's like 1954, 2004, not much has changed. And it's like, that's really, you have to be buying into a lot of baseline assumptions for that to hit. There's a lot of things that you almost have to say, are we dealing with what is it? Are we dealing with outliers? What are outliers come into play? How common stuff is? But I think there is still something to the fact of, and I think you hit it on the head about there are systems and institutions in place that allow for biases and those things to become more magnified than they should. Because my mother said it one time. She says, what she realized, and my dad said the same thing growing up in the South, is that when they grew up in the South as kids, they were perfectly fine playing with the white kid or whoever across the street. And we're talking about under, at the very least, Jim Crow, definitely my dad. It wasn't an issue. Sometimes they would get fights and stuff like that. It was only when the system came into play, when it came into the play, when an institution in the form of adults or the police showed up, that you were all of a sudden now reminded of what these divisions were between you. And there was actually a guy who gave an interview where he said that he was a young black kid in the South, and he would play with this white girl. I forgot what her name was just say Sally. He used to play all the time, or like regular playmates. And then one day, I think he got to be about maybe 11 or 12, and he was told very specifically by his parents, you can't play with her anymore. Because now the institutions were kicking in. And
it's dangerous.
Yeah, you're seeing as dangerous now, or that relationship now. Before, you guys were like in like Flynn, thick as thieves, but now because of the system now, it's like if you're seen with her, that'll get you killed. And I think there's not only is there a very not only is there a through line for that comes over into the society today. I think there's also, and I'm gonna get a little I don't know what the word is for exactly, but there's also even a psychic through line that as a result of that, because certain things become ingrained and you take on, and when I say racial, I mean like the human race, it becomes a part of the racial memory of that. You understand that of other is that if you're perceived as the other, you have to realize there's things that you have to watch out for. And if there's an other, then that means there has to be something that's considered, for lack of a better word, normal, or what the standard is, or what's accepted. So that's always coming into the play here. And that's why when we talk about when you go globally, it's like, I may be the other here in America, but someplace else, you might be the other.
Yeah,
or even that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you might be the other. So it's like, it's like, well, like, if you, like, for those of us who just watch Japanese culture, the gaijin, or if you Mexican culture, gringo, it's like, yeah, that's that's their word.
Here
for
they
you.
call
That's
me
their
Joe.
word for you over there. Now, why do they call you
down
Joe?
the street, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Joe. All of them. When they do it to
Where
my
does that
kids,
come
I get
from?
mad. Like, don't.
Okay.
It's what they call GIs, I guess. But when they do it to my
GIs,
kids, I get
the
mad.
GI
But they
Joe.
can call me Joe. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, whatever.
So
dude.
exactly. Yeah. So.
You want me
So
to do?
man, okay, I got through this hour. I don't know if I got through it well with flying colors, but I got through this hour.
That's
Hopefully I haven't
fun.
lost
These are
black
always
cards,
good.
so. No, it is. No, it is good to talk about. Like I said, you've definitely given me a few things. You've definitely given me a few things to think about, and I'm gonna have to reassess. I'm gonna have to reassess some things because I do agree with you. It's like it's something I don't push to my own kids. That's
the thing.
what I
It's the
teach them
kids,
is
man.
that you have no. Yeah, it's the kids. It's
My
that
kids
they don't
are
have
more
anything to
accepting
be ashamed.
than I ever was.
Yeah. Yeah, and my kids have had. I tell people all the time, my kids have had a much more cosmopolitan experience than I ever had at their age. Yeah. It's like it's like for me, it was very. I don't know, it was very segregated growing up. But I'll say this: is that I don't teach my kids that they have to assume the responsibility of making black people look good wherever they go. But I also teach them you don't have to be ashamed of being black. There's nothing to be ashamed of. You're black. You're black. That's who you are. It's a part of who you are. And if anybody tries to make you ashamed of it, yeah, they got to go kick rocks. But I think at the end of the day, I'm still of the mind that there is no such thing as race, and I think that's a total social construct. I think that's even now one of the reasons why we have to have these. Is the human race. The only reason we have to have a conversation about should white people feel guilty is because we've introduced something into our discourse. We're posing on ourselves. And if you take the race out of it, then it's just a question of, did you punch that guy in the face or not? And if you did, then this is what you got to pay for. Because then, while I do agree with people politically who say that at the end of the day, for us to move forward, it has to be about class and you have to excuse race. The only reason I have a problem with that is that race is something that you have to deal with, regardless of whether you believe it or not, regardless of what you think it is or not. You have to deal with it because it's baked into our system as part of the social systems and institutions. Unfortunately, it is. So you have to reckon with it. So you either eliminate it or reckon with it.
All about opportunities. As long as everybody has an opportunity to fighting chance, I think the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yeah. The pursuit of happiness is an opportunity, and this is how I know I'm doing something right, Gevian. Well, you and I can disagree on here, and that's fine. Yeah. And, we're still friends, and you've got me thinking on things and. I know you're thinking on some
things.
Got me
thinking on things. Yep, that's right.
when my son, he's 6 years old. When he was 5, he could actually go to school. He went into school, and the teacher came out and she talked to us, and she says, "One of our students in his class is autistic, and when I'm teaching, he gets up and walks around the class. And your son, every time it happens, he goes up and he gets him and he walks him back and lets him know everything's okay, and he talks him back into his chair and makes him feel good." I said, "You know what? Yep. I did something right."
Yep, that's the dream, man. That's the dream. Yeah, unfortunately, it does take baby steps, but we got to keep having discussions like this.
A step forward is what
step forward.
Way I see
it's got to be. So you know what? Actually, I'm glad we had this talk. I'm gonna have more like these in the future. But it's like, you know what? This is the way it's got to be. I'm definitely a firm believer in communication and talk about these tough things. That's why when you came to me with this show, I was like, I'm willing to be game because it's going to require some of us to kind of like publicly struggle, like you said, publicly contradict what we're saying, publicly struggle, publicly rethink and reassess for other people to feel comfortable having those conversations. They got to see what those conversations look like. Somebody, in this case, I'm willing to unilaterally disarm.
All right, we'll see you next week, buddy.
Most definitely. You take care, Wes, and everybody out there. Take care. Be safe.